flourished because of the deep abiding faith of so many citizens, attributable to the powerful and faithful preachers that stood behind the pulpits. When we have the mentality that you don't mix religion and politics, that is a wicked mentality. It is only a mentality of someone who does not want righteousness inserted into politics. And that's the only people that really get offended. But if you don't, this is where it was done in the founding of our nation, from the pulpit. This is where it was done. And so as we have people that might get upset about me talking politics, well, just get over it. So, yeah, suck it up, Buttercup. I don't know what else to tell you. But it's going to be done here because we recognize that this is the founding of our nation, this is the foundation of our nation, and we're going to have to continue to come back to there, because what happens when you don't is you drift. You don't have to do a thing to drift, but you have to be vigilant to stay on a foundation. And we always naturally drift. That's a natural thing to drift unless you stay vigilant to stay connected. So we're going to do our best to stay connected. I did mention our first week how that there is a threat. There's a very imminent and dangerous threat. And right now, they're going nuts. And that is the Marxist agenda. Now, out of Marxism comes all sorts of other isms. Y'all don't mind if I get rid of my trash, I hope. The wind got it, and it was. So anyway, out of Marxism comes all kinds of Leninism, Maoism, Communism, Nazism, socialism. Socialism is the most easily accepted, but it usually turns into other things such as communism. And we have seen their activity, because now, as they used to try and be kind of subtle, it's now all out and open. They tried to destroy, unknowingly, that is what they're doing. God has formed three institutions: the family, the civil government, and the church. On Sunday mornings, we started going through the wilderness wanderings of the nation of Israel, and we happen to be at this point in the Bible in which God is handing down law and trying to say, if this nation is going to survive, the Jewish nation, that it will have to be through this order that he lays down. So the leftist agenda attacks all three: the family, civil government, and the church. They attack all three. I'm not going to reteach all these things, but you can pull it up on the Facebook and find it all there, or on our website. Just go to our webpage, sandspringsbdc.com, and it will be Faith, Family, and Freedom Week 1. And it's even got pictures. All right, so there are those three institutions that God has given, handed down to man, and those are the three institutions that the leftist agenda is trying to dismantle. So number one is the family. How do they do that? How you dismantle the family? Well, you decrease its importance by pushing a homosexual agenda, and you can just see it all over the place. We're not going to reteach it again. The family, dismantle the family. What happens is your children become a product of the state. And they're property of the state. And so that's the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. All you got to do is read that, and you'll see their game plan. Number two, civil government. Civil government, specifically the police, their role is to protect property. And in the mind of a Marxist, property is evil. And so you're seeing that now in the news as they're destroying property, and they're hollering out Black Lives Matter, and yet they're destroying black people's property. Why? It's not really about black lives. It's about the destruction of property. And it's because in their mind, property is evil, because if you eliminate property, now we're all on a level playing field, and everybody gets a fair balance. Of course, it never has worked. It never will work. By the way, interesting thing, if you ask someone who is pushing a socialist agenda, if it's never worked in history, why are you trying to make it happen here? Well, they'll say, well, it's never worked in history because America's always messed it up. So if we can make America socialist, then it'll work everywhere else. Boo. All right, so that's just... and then there is the church. And we have seen now the church they've tried to silence the church. They've used coronavirus to try and silence the church, keeping us from worshiping. But this is nothing new. It didn't start with coronavirus. You can go back to 1962, and the Supreme Court handed down some laws in which you attack all three. The first one was 1962 or 63, which we removed prayer from school. And when that started, there was no precedence before 62. It started then and then snowballed. It has snowballed ever since then. I was just, as we were having supper, remembering in elementary school, and I don't remember if it was school prayer or whatever, but I remember we had one girl in our class, and I remember the whole school had to stop doing, I think it was prayer. And it was because we had one student in our class whose dad pushed for this silencing of anything of Christian sort. By the way, you'll notice that it's only Christianity that's in the crosshairs. It's only Christianity that's in the crosshairs. They're anti-Christians. And so, anyway, as Karl Marx said, his goal in life was to dethrone God and to destroy property. And that's what you see in the agenda today. All right, so they have done a great job. I'm going to just kind of give you my thoughts on this. They've done a great job in making their far fringe thoughts now mainline. Now what used to be fringe is common. And how did they do it? It was mostly through our universities. It's mostly through our young people. And so it's a concerted effort to attack the faith in our universities. I'm reading this great book by Rick Scarborough. Some of y'all know who he is. Enough is Enough. And he brings out a lot of this stuff. But they tried through our schools and universities and colleges to make liberal and push their agenda through our students, through our young people. And it works. It works. If you have liberal professors, they will use a few different efforts to, number one, dismantle their faith. Because if you can take them off of the foundation that their parents built, now you get to be the builder of their new foundation. And so you dismantle their faith. And I have had students go through my Bible class at a Christian school only to later come back and say that they're now socialists. And my thought is, well, I didn't teach them good enough. But, of course, it's not my total responsibility. They weren't part of our church, or even if they were, it's not even the church's responsibility. It is a task we take as a responsibility. But whose responsibility is it? It's the home. It's the home. And so they've done a pretty good job of dismantling what really probably wasn't there to start with, because I happen to know these families too. And so, anyway, one of the ways they do this is through sex. They will convince the students that through sex, it is only Christian standards that keep them from experimenting in this area. And so if they just break free from the bondage of their old Christian, their old historic faith, and begin to branch out and explore, well, that's pretty appealing. If you just mark her down, look through the scriptures, every time there is a running to the left, sex is involved. Every time there's a running to the left, sex is involved. Just think about the 1960s. I mentioned in 62, 63, the Supreme Court handed down, no more prayer in school. They had no right to do that, by the way. That is called judicial tyranny. They had no right to do that. The Supreme Court is now making their own rules. They were not elected into office. They were selected into office. and yet they hand down rules for all of us. We, the people, didn't put them there. And yet they're handing down rules that we, the people, have to live with, and our forefathers did not intend on it being such. Anyway, I might get a little worked up here and there on some of these things. But let me just, have anybody ever had a near-death experience? Anybody ever had a near-death experience? I nearly drowned once, and a few car accidents that came real close. Rodeo accidents, motorcycle accidents. None of them, those were near-death, but I nearly drowned once. And that was pretty scary. And when you realize you came pretty close to death, it's kind of eye-opening. Our nation had a near-death experience in 2016. If Hillary Clinton, or as I like to refer to her as Jezebel, if she would have been elected as president, what they would have run through on us, our nation would have never recovered from. Never recovered from. If the left gets all three branches of our government, we are done. We are done. Hillary already said that if she were elected president, all those illegal aliens who were in our country, she would give them voting rights. And who do you think they would vote for? I mean, we know who they'd vote for. And it wouldn't be very long before the left would have all three branches. And let me tell you, they have already shown, and they've been working towards this leftist, Marxist, socialist agenda, and had she gotten office, we would already have been handed it down already. And even me saying what I'm saying would be probably criminalized. I got an email yesterday. This is interesting. Let me just read you my email. There's a pastor's group. U.S. Pastor Council, September 28th. This is down in Midland, Texas. Pastor Bob Fu, he's obviously Chinese, has now been threatened by a Chinese gang. It says, we received this note, and let me just point to, it says, it is so serious, the threat is so serious that the FBI and local law enforcement are already involved. Chinese communist thugs are threatening China Aid President Pastor Bob Fu and his family in Midland, Texas, here on American soil. They have now taken this man and put him in protection, a pastor, because he's speaking on the things that I'm speaking on. And CCP's Antifa leader in New York City, Miles, I can't say that name, announced plans to send hundreds of thugs to Pastor Bob Fu's house on 9/28. Please pray and support if you are in Permian Basin area. Our China Aid Ministry office is also a target. That's happened this week. And don't you know that if she had won the election, that what I'm saying would already be outlawed. Already be outlawed. And they're still trying. What we're seeing now is them scrambling because they know they are so close to losing what they worked so many years for, and they're going to lose it for years, maybe forever. Amen? They won't quit trying. They won't quit trying. This is why they're pretty stinking good. Why? Because they know the power of focus. They know the power of vision. And if you can get people focused on a vision and united for that vision and keep on coming, it'll eventually come through, unless there is an equal and opposite force. Not equal. We're so much greater because we have God on our side. What was a Texas Ranger says, evil cannot stand against the good man that keeps on coming. I think as a Texas Ranger, it sounds right. And but what happens is we get tired and we quit. And we say, just make the whining stop. And you just can't do that. We just cannot do that. We have to stay vigilant. And so anyway, how are they coming through with their agenda? How is it that they have been so successful to come so far? Through their young people. Let me, can I read Sand Springs Vision once again? Come on. sandspringsbc.com. If you go to that website, this should be on y'all's This should come up pretty fast on your computers and cell phones because there's stuff here that you can use. All right? So our values and our vision are on the front page. Here's what it says, our vision. I'm going to keep telling y'all this because, again, if the left knows that you keep driving towards a vision and you will eventually be successful, that is a truth, a reality. Church, we better be listening to this because this is a truth, and truth is truth no matter who abides by it. And they've just stolen God's truth. We are a revolutionary church. It's Sand Springs. We are a revolutionary church is breaking the mold on church and reaching the next generation. Churches have mistakenly attempted to reach the younger generation by being light on the word and liberal in their stances. It hasn't worked, and the product that you get is less than earth-shaking. We know people, including young people, have a desire to understand the Bible and to live out its principles. We know that we can be conservative and have biblical depth and still appeal to the younger generation. Amen? I'm going to stop there. It keeps on going. I got a little wordy as I was covering that. But what am I saying? There's a reason why when you come in, there's now new lights. There's a little smoke and stuff going on. And some people come in like, smoking lights. I don't know if I like this. Why do we do it? Well, we do it because we let our young people lead. That's right. We let our young people lead because we put value in them, because if we don't put value in them, I guarantee you the liberal universities that they go to, they will, because they'll use them for their agenda. Right. And so they better find a home in the church, because they most certainly will find one out there, because they'll just be an instrument, and I know this makes people uneasy when I say it, but just as the black race is, an instrument for an agenda. There is the Democratic Party is so racist. They want to accuse, since Lyndon Baines Johnson, they want to accuse the Republican Party of being racist. Just go back and listen to the recordings of that man. And he knew that if he could get the black race voting Democrat, well, all you got to do is hear his own words, what he said. I won't repeat them. So stinking racist. Here's the interesting thing. I always say in our leadership is that you duplicate what you celebrate. And so the activity that we love to see going on here at our church, we'll celebrate it. We'll mention someone doing such a fine job. Or we'll celebrate activity. You duplicate what you celebrate. You also duplicate what you incentivize. You duplicate what you incentivize, and you reduce what you tax. Let's think about that for a second. You duplicate what you incentivize. You get more of it if you incentivize it, and you reduce it if you tax it. What does the left want to tax? Business makers, job builders. They're always saying, well, we need to tax those who are making the most money, redistribution of wealth. It ain't nothing but socialism. Never worked, never will. Because those who work the hardest to make the jobs and make the businesses are now being taxed, and so they're not going to put as much into it, but you get more of what you incentivize. And what am I talking about there? The welfare state. And how is the welfare state so broken? It incentivizes fatherlessness, and the more children, the more money, as long as there is no marriage. This is another breakdown of the family. Don't marry, just keep having babies, and you can continue to draw a check. So what happens? We get more of that, and more of that, and more of that. And then it's almost like you have gone so far down that road that you can't come off of that road. And then it goes from generation to generation to generation. Does that make sense? And so this is how we have, the left has kept a people who don't know how to break out of that captive. captive. And this is why I say it's racist. One of the reasons I say it's racist. Yes, I know it's controversial. Yes, we have already received some bad mail. But truth is truth. And so I'm going to speak it. All right. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into a video. The video is 30 minutes long, but I'm only going to show it because it's so stinking good. It's so good. A picture's worth 1,000 words. That's another reason why we do this. Video is now becoming, we have almost 2,000 followers on Facebook. Isn't that awesome? And so right now, 2,000 people have just gotten word that I'm talking about this. 2,000. That's pretty cool. That's good stuff. And so, I don't know how many percentage of that are getting mad right now, but some. But that's okay, because you got to sometimes get rattled before you get righted. Sometimes we got to get mad before we get right. And so let's just keep telling the truth, and sometimes eventually people will get it. So when I said this is Americans' Christian heritage and how to keep it, I haven't yet said how to keep it. Here's how to keep it. Number one, pray. Pray, pray, pray. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and what? Pray. 2 Chronicles 7:14. So pray. Towards the end of this series, I want to teach you how to pray. But for right now, pray. This, Lord, if it be your will, kind of weak prayer, that ain't how we pray. That ain't how that's weak. That ain't how Jesus prayed. And if you are thinking about his prayer in the garden as if it be thy will, that's not exactly how that went down. He asked, Lord, I would rather this cup pass from me, but I'm going to do whatever you want to do, God. That's what he said. And so it's not that's a weak prayer. Just, oh, Lord, if it be your will, let our nation survive. Can I just tell you, it is his will. We are a light unto the world. The United States, somebody said this, I don't know who said it, but it is so good, I'm going to repeat it. If the United States loses its light, all the world gets a little darker. That's true, isn't it? That's true. So, number one, pray. Number two, use your voice. That's what I'm doing right now. Use your voice. Miss Shelley showed me a video a little bit ago of he looked like a street thug. That used to be a bad word, it's not anymore. Thug life. And I don't mean it in a bad way, but I don't know how else to put it. And this dude was so sharp, and he was talking to someone, another black man, about how he was voting. And he said, why are you voting for Biden? What has he done? Of course, God could give him anything. And then he began to use his voice to make a difference. Use your voice. So number one, pray, use your voice. Number two, use your vote. It is not merely your right to vote, it is your responsibility to vote. And if you do not vote, you are negligent as a Christian. And you ought to feel guilty. I'm not a guilt person, I'm a grace person, but if you don't vote, you ought to feel guilty. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. When it talks about mixing religion and politics, the great evangelist Charles Finney said this: the church must take right ground in regard to politics. The time has come for Christians to vote for honest men and take consistent ground in politics, or the Lord will curse them. God cannot sustain this free. Have you ever thought about it? God can't do something? Jesus said he couldn't do many things because of their unbelief. Here's what I do know. If we act, he will act. This is what dawned on me yesterday as I was doing my Bible study. I was in the book of Zechariah, and I'm reading through, and he would give his word to the prophet, and the prophet would tell the people. And if the people were, then God would act on behalf of the people. That's how he always works. He says he doesn't do anything without first giving a word to his prophets. So God always acts and never does anything outside of his word. But I'm always saying, I need a word from God. I need a word from God. And so God gives his word to his people, and if his people act on that, then he acts. He acts when we act. That makes sense? Sure. This whole pray and wait business, there's pray, but there's action. Faith is moving on what God has said. Right. Not sitting on what God has said. It is moving on what God has said. Does that make sense? Faith is acting as if what he said is true. Then he said, God cannot sustain this free and blessed country, which we love and pray for, unless the church will take right ground. Politics are a part of religion in such a country as this. Christians must do their duty to their country as a part of their duty to God. Amen. That's good. That's good right there. So maybe you've heard of Finney, Charles Finney. Maybe you hadn't. I bet you've heard of Charles Haddon Spurgeon. Spurgeon says this, I often hear it said, do not bring religion into politics. This is precisely where it ought to be. Amen. Ain't that good? All right. So, number one, pray. Number two, use your voice. Number three, use your vote. Number four, I guess it's four, use your money. Use your money. If there's anything that speaks louder than money, I don't know what it is. Money talks, and I won't finish the rest of it, but money don't just talk, money yells. And that's the only thing that'll get some of these people's attention, such as NFL, NBA, or whatever all these acronyms, MLB, and professional sports. I'm telling you, I love me some football. And y'all know me, I love some Dallas Cowboys. I ain't watched a minute of their football this season yet. And it's hard for me. But it's a stance that I chose to do. I just said, I'm just going to use, they're not going to get one rating off of me. And I know the Dallas Cowboys tried to toe the line, but they completely gave in. And so I'm out. But I'm just saying, use your money. Do not support. And it's hit them. It's hit them. 30% drop in ratings. Is that correct, Bruce? In the NFL? That speaks volumes to them. So use your money. Be careful what you pay for. Be careful what you pray for. And be careful what you pay for. And then go back to praying again. All right. And then also, here's one thing that I've had to repent over, is that I have been critical of politics. We need godly men and women to move into politics. It just needs to happen. One of the best in our county is a member of Sand Springs Baptist Church, and I am so proud of Clint Davis. Because Clint Davis, before he was a member here, he stood up for religious liberties and stood against a very powerful, when I mean powerful, I mean rich, a very powerful organization that don't like me none. And that's the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And they wanted to sue our county over our nativity scene. And by the way, the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Wisconsin, if you're watching right now, God bless you. Because every time they attack a county, every time they attack a community, God gets to come take advantage of that opportunity. There's a movie being made right now. They actually videoed me on the courthouse lawn in regards to our helping of a fellow down in San Antonio who was the first attack in our county. And then Sand Springs come alongside and help support this guy. And the guy who worked with Jeff Foxworthy, American Bible, what's that show? The Bible Challenge, American Bible Challenge. Tony Schultz, he wrote a book, put us in the book, and is now making a movie about this because he was sued by the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And he is documenting, I have the book, that every county or city, it has worked in Christianity's favor. That's the way God works. When persecuted, God's people will shine. And so, interesting enough. I don't know where I was going with all. We need godly men and women in politics. We need that. And Clint has been that for us, and we are so appreciative of him. And I could just keep naming names. I'm not going to. But we need good, godly, honest, loyal people in politics. Now, it's dangerous. It's dirty. It'll try and suck you in. This is where then you need to surround yourself with God's people. So, along those lines, you might say, well, that's not my game. I'm not fit for politics. Yeah, but we may be, y'all see how many teenagers were here tonight? We may be the ones who bring up a generation of leaders. And what are they going to need? Support from you. They're going to need a protective group of people around them saying, this is the foundation that we built you on. And this is what we're going to hold you accountable to. And we're going to protect you from all that other garbage. Because you're going to, and so this is where we could come in to that business. And so to be a voice no matter where you are, but it may be that you have a help in raising up our young in education and support and all of that kind of stuff. All right? So let's watch that video, Miss Shelley. This is going to be just a quick overview of America, the greatest nation in the world.
Country is the offspring of a religious-based heritage of liberty under law. Blessed with great natural resources and a pioneer people given to industry and moral discipline, our nation grew to be strong and prosperous and developed the finest governmental system ever devised by man. America soon became known as the refuge of the world's tired, hungry, and poor. Millions left everything in the old world to start over in a land that rewarded initiative and hard work and perseverance. The many millions who didn't come here found comfort and hope in knowing that indeed there was such a bastion of freedom and opportunity, a place where dreams could become reality. Today, our nation appears wealthier and more powerful than ever. New technologies have revolutionized our daily lives. Luxuries once enjoyed only by the rich are commonplace and very affordable. Home ownership is widespread, and our people have the expectation of continued economic growth and prosperity. Yet more and more people are coming to realize that they may prosper materially only for a time because their freedoms are diminishing. The sobering reality is that America has been led far from its praiseworthy beginnings. Our people and businesses groan under a heavy burden of economic, political, and social problems, which are the result of a widespread departure from the fundamental truths that made our nation great. If the United States of America is to endure, citizens far and wide must once again come to understand, embrace, and live by timeless concepts called Americanism. What made America great and set it apart from other lands? Was it natural resources? No, other lands are equally blessed. Was it the people? No, the people who built America came from elsewhere. Was it government planning and wisdom that spurred our nation to such heights? No again. It wasn't what government did that made America great. It was what government was prevented from doing that made the difference. What set America apart from other lands was freedom for the individual. Freedom to work, to produce, to succeed, and especially to keep the fruits of one's labors. America became great precisely because the stifling effect of too much government had been prevented. However, freedom in America was not totally unrestrained. Americans overwhelmingly chose to limit their actions with moral codes such as the Ten Commandments, personal morality, and limited government. It's a combination that characterized America and made it the envy of the world. When our founding fathers decided they'd had enough of British oppression, they broke away and declared independence. They stated as self-evident truth in the Declaration of Independence that men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In other words, God gave man his rights, and that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in the very next sentence, the founders defined the proper role of government when they stated that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. This is the entire philosophical base of our nation. Here, the government cannot legitimately redistribute the wealth, assume power over the people's lives, and dominate man's existence with oppressive taxation, regulations, and controls. According to the founders, government was to be a negative force, which leaves people alone. Its sole function is to protect citizens from one another and from foreign governments, and especially from their own government itself. The founders did not create a government to be a positive force, to do things for people, to take from some, to give to others. They understood that when a government starts doing something for one citizen, it has to take from another to do so. And in the process, it gains control over both. Britain's rulers didn't accept the Declaration of Independence, so our forefathers had to fight a war to make it stick. By 1783, the War for Independence had been won, and British forces were sent back across the sea. But the governmental system at that time was weak. It had no power to settle disputes between the states, nor the power to tax for proper needs, such as national defense. So in 1787, delegates from 12 of the 13 states met in Philadelphia to revise the system, and they produced an entirely new governmental structure known as the Constitution of the United States. Keeping faith with the thunderous assertions in the Declaration, the Constitution was written to govern the government, not the people, and not the states, each of which was a jealous guardian of its own sovereignty. The founders created a central government with strictly limited powers. This left the states free to compete with one another, to be the best state, the one with the least amount of taxation and controls, one where citizens would want to build a business and raise a family. That spirit of competition produced excellence, as honest competition always does. It's important to note that the Constitution wasn't forced on the people. It was sent back to the states for ratification, and several of the Founding Fathers wrote essays explaining it in an effort to persuade fellow Americans to adopt this new system of government. Some of the essays written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay were collected into a volume known as the Federalist Papers. Those essays provide valuable insights into the intent of the founders in establishing our government. Eventually, all 13 states ratified the Constitution, and then each ratified the first 10 amendments known as the Bill of Rights, further tying the hands of the federal government. These amendments are indeed about rights, but it would have been better had the Bill of Rights been labeled the Bill of Limitations on Government. Why? Because it's vital to realize that the Bill of Rights never gave citizens any rights whatsoever. Its sole purpose was to safeguard God-given rights by limiting government power. The founders even insisted that Congress shall make no law about speech, religion, the press, assembly, the right to petition, the right to keep and bear arms, and so on. These amendments are directed squarely at the federal government, not the individual and not the states. They are like most of the 10 Commandments, which are essentially thou shalt nots. The Bill of Rights says Congress shall not, all the way up to the marvelous 10th Amendment, which says in effect, if we forgot anything, you can't do that either. When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group, is the most common form of government in all history. And it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments, so they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake, because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and held that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change. The condition of anarchy is very much like a vacuum where something rushes in to fill it. These calculating anarchists work to break down the existing government with rioting, killing, looting, and terrorism. Tragically, the people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order. And who is best able to put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power. But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule. Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin, res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king. But the founding fathers knew history, and they chose to give us the rule of law in a republic, not the rule of a majority in a democracy. Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting of the Old West. Consider a lynch mob in a democracy. 35 horseback riders chase one lone gunman. They catch him, and they vote 35-1 to hang him. Democracy has triumphed, and there's one less gunman to contend with. Now consider the same scenario in a republic. The 35 horseback riders catch the gunman and vote 35-1 to hang him, but the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair trial." So they take the gunman back to town. A jury of his peers is selected, and they hear the evidence and the defense, and they decide if he shall hang. Does the jury even decide by majority rule? No, it has to be unanimous or he goes free. The rights of the gunman aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic. Many Americans would be surprised to learn that the word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, nor does it appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. The founders did everything they could to keep us from having a democracy. James Madison, rightly known as the father of the Constitution, wrote in essay number 10 of the Federalist Papers, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Alexander Hamilton agreed, and he stated, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." Samuel Adams, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, stated, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." The founders had good reason to look upon democracy with contempt because they knew that the democracies in the early Greek city-states produced some of the wildest excesses of government imaginable. In every case, they ended up with mob rule, then anarchy, and finally tyranny under an oligarchy. During that period in Greece, there was a man named Solon who urged creation of a fixed body of law not subject to majority whims. But where the Greeks never adopted Solon's wise counsel, the Romans did. Based on what they knew of Solon's laws, they created the 12 tables of the Roman law and, in effect, built a republic that limited government power and left the people alone. Since government was limited, the people were free to produce, with the understanding that they could keep the fruits of their labor. In time, Rome became wealthy and the envy of the world. In the midst of plenty, however, the Roman people forgot what freedom entailed. They forgot that the essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government. When government power grows, people freedom recedes. Once the Romans dropped their guard, power-seeking politicians began to exceed the powers granted them in the Roman Constitution. Some learned that they could elect politicians who would use government power to take property from some and give it to others. Agriculture subsidies were introduced, followed by housing and welfare programs. Inevitably, taxes rose and controls over the private sector were imposed. Soon, a number of Rome's producers could no longer make ends meet, and they went on the dole. Productivity declined, shortages developed, and mobs began roaming the streets, demanding bread and circuses from the government. Many were induced to trade freedom for security. Eventually, the whole system came crashing down to a democracy and ended up with an oligarchy under a progression of the Caesars. Thus, democracy itself is not a stable form of government. Instead, it is the gradual transition from limited government to the unlimited rule of an oligarchy. Knowing this, we as Americans are ultimately left with only two choices. We can keep our republic, as Franklin put it, or we will inevitably end up with an oligarchy, a tyranny of the elite. Just as there is widespread confusion regarding political systems, there is similar confusion in the economic arena. All during the 20th century, Americans were led to believe that there was a great struggle going on between capitalism and the communist world. Undoubtedly, a struggle existed, but the real adversaries were rarely identified properly. No discussion about economic systems will make sense without first defining terms. And one of the most basic terms in economics is capital, whose definition is the means of production. To illustrate what capital is, let's consider a very simple economy. On the sands of a small island, a castaway has just washed ashore. He has no food and he's hungry. He searches the island, he finds no berries, coconuts, or anything edible. He goes back into the water and tries to catch fish with his bare hands, but he fails. So he goes back up on shore and he finds a bush. He breaks off a branch, he gnaws at one end to make a sharp tip. Back into the water he goes, and with his spear, he catches fish. His spear is capital. It's the means of production for catching fish. He gave up some of his time and some of his energy to produce something he could not eat, but something that would help him to produce something that he could eat. Capital, therefore, can be tools, machinery, and even a man's handmade spear to catch fish. Such being the case, consider that the communists in the former Soviet Union, as well as in China and Cuba, have always used tools and machinery. Officials there even view people as capital. Therefore, by strict definition, are not communists capitalists? For that matter, isn't everyone a capitalist? And so, is not every economic system a capitalist system? What then is the difference between what the communist system is and what the American capitalist system is supposed to be? The difference is ownership of the capital. Is the system monopolistic, state-controlled capitalism, or is it competitive, free enterprise capitalism? It is between these two opposing economic systems that a battle has always raged. Before we proceed, let's also define free market. Basically, it's a self-regulating system in which all parties are completely free to transact with one another. But where force, fraud, or injury damages one party, the government's role is only to punish those who commit such offenses and to vindicate the rights of the other party. This protects the integrity of the free market, or free enterprise system, without intervening in it. The term private property also needs clarification, for private ownership and control of property is a key component in the free enterprise system. In order for ownership of property to be full and complete, all four of its aspects must be met. These are title, control, use, and the ability to dispose of what a person owns. In a free market economy, these aspects are unrestrained, so long as the owner does not infringe on the legitimate rights and claims of others. True ownership of property and freedom go hand in hand. They always have. Now let's compare the two systems of capitalism. In the competitive free enterprise system, capital or property is both owned privately and controlled privately. In the monopolistic system, holding title to capital can be accomplished privately or by the state. But more importantly, capital is controlled by the state or by the elite few who control the state. The Communist Manifesto, which contains the basic program for all communists and all socialists, explicitly preaches the destruction and abolition of private property. Karl Marx understood the powers of controlling capital, and so have all communists and socialists who have ever looked and still look to Marx as their leader. State-controlled capitalism results in high prices and low quality. After all, why would a monopoly strive to improve if it has no competition? On the other hand, honest, thrifty, and hardworking producers throughout the world prefer a competitive free enterprise system for all. Here, low prices and high quality prevail because a variety of producers will seek to attract the widest amount of customers. Competition results in excellence and always has. Just as the political spectrum shows the range of government power, we can also plot the various economic systems along another spectrum. These forms of government control in the market stand in sharp contrast with a completely free market. In the last century or so, there have been basically 4 forms of state-controlled economies, all on the far left of the economic spectrum: fascism, Nazism, socialism, and communism. In each, the government controls the capital. The difference among these is how much is owned or controlled outright by the government. In a fascist system, the government doesn't own businesses on paper, but it does control them. In Mussolini's Italy, even though he didn't hold title to businesses, he told the owners what to produce, how much to produce, when to produce, where to buy raw materials, who to hire, who to fire, and what price to charge. The rest, he said, was up to them. The fascist system is more efficient than other state control systems insofar as those living under it think they still own their businesses. Shopkeepers concern themselves with maintenance on the machinery, employee relations, painting the building, and so forth. But the government controls owners through an array of taxation and regulations. Under Nazism, which means National Socialism, its proponents went one step further and acquired ownership of some corporations such as Volkswagen. However, Hitler didn't seize ownership of other industrial giants. He simply controlled them, just as Mussolini had controlled businesses in Italy. Socialism is where government officials acquire possession of major industries such as transportation, communications, and utilities in order to leverage control over the entire economy. Through ownership of these vital segments of industry and by creating government regulatory agencies, socialists gain control over virtually everything else. Finally, there is communism, the granddaddy of all in the economic sense. In a way, communism is more honest than fascism because all of the capital is owned and controlled by the state. There are no pretenses about it. Now let's combine political and economic systems, because ultimately one never exists without the other. We see again that there are only 2 ultimate choices: a competitive free enterprise system in a republic, or a monopolistic state control system under an oligarchy. A moral people have always been a vital element of America's strength. The Founding Fathers well understood the biblical teaching that righteousness exalteth a nation. They also knew that expecting a free market economy and limited government under a republic to endure without morality was expecting the impossible. James Madison cautioned that limited government alone was inadequate for our nation. And John Adams observed, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." George Washington stated, "Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle." Yet there are people today who think that liberty is license and that morality is unimportant or irrelevant to politics and economics. But as Benjamin Franklin added, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. The alternative to Americanism is what has condemned most of the human race to live as slaves throughout the millennia. It is the idea that rights are privileges dispensed by an oligarchy according to the unlimited rule of men, that the state should control or own the nation's capital with all economic activity directed from a central power, and that morality is inconsequential, and that security is preferred over freedom and opportunity. Our nation continues to be steered off course, and the principles that led to America's greatness are being cast aside. The simple question for us is, do we continue the slide away from our nation's founding principles, or do we return to the kind of government we inherited? Time is running out for Americans who sense that something is wrong. They have to decide what kind of a country we shall leave for future generations. All that is needed is for a sufficient number of Americans to get involved in the fight for freedom and to return our nation to less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world.
That sure helps us to understand what we're about. It sure helps us to understand these terms if maybe you didn't know them before. And it really helps us to appreciate what we have, doesn't it? I mean, it helps me really appreciate what we have as the greatest nation in the world. So I talked too much before, and so we're out of time. But let me just say this. I said first pray, use your voice, use your vote. You have to get registered to vote this week. And so there are voter registrations back there. You may be saying, well, I don't know if I'm registered or not. If you go to Sand Springs website, again, you ought to be able to find that pretty quick and easy. You go to Sand Springs website, you'll notice on there, what's the tab, sister? It's ivote.com. It's on the first slide. All right, so it's ivote.com. If you will go to ivote.com, you can just go straight there if you want, but you can link to it through our website. You can find whether you're registered or not. You can check your registration if you're registered or not. And then in that, it will tell you what ballot you have. And so we had sample ballots. There's umpteen ballots in each precinct. And you may not know, if you want to see a ballot beforehand, you can do that. How you do it is to find out what part of the precinct, what ballot you have. Like, I'm in Bethel Community, I'm a 3N. That don't mean anything to you. But it's whatever, school district and all that stuff. There's your voter registration card. You can find that, in a matter of minutes, a couple minutes. Find out if you're registered. If not, if you don't even know if you are, grab a registration card. Get registered this week. Because if you don't get registered this week, you can't vote. Don't mail it in. You can take it to the Republican office. Voter registration. Yeah, I'm not supposed to say Republican, but it's pretty obvious. There's, where the moral lines stand. Anyway, it's not that I'm not supposed to. I'm not pushing a party. Just know that. If there's a crook in the Republican Party, I'm against him just as much as I am anybody else. But anyway, you got to take it up there. If you put it in the mail, it won't get there in time. You won't be able to vote. And so here you go. Educated voter. That's on the front page. Educated voter. When you click on that, it'll take you to iVoter Guide. You can go to, see, there's our zip code. That's my ballot. But if Shelley wants to find out if she is registered, check voter registration status. And you click on that, and 2,000 people are going to see all your information. So don't do that. Anyway, that's how you find out if you're registered to vote. If you're not registered, get registered quickly. And then if you do this, you can then go to henderson-county.com, and under departments right there, you can slide down to election voter registration, and you will see all the different ballots. Since you already found out on iVoter which ballot is yours, then you can see a sample ballot of who you're voting for. Where it really is going to change is constables and commissioners and those local guys, okay? All right, so get registered and vote. It is unfortunate. It's worse than unfortunate. It's sickening how many Christians don't vote. Sickening. If 50% of Christians voted, only half, it wouldn't even be close when it comes to who gets put in office. It wouldn't be close. But so few people vote, and they think, well, my one vote don't count. Well, it was obvious this last election. It does. It does, absolutely. And so you need to vote. I mean, I don't know how else I can stress it any stronger. But it's not just your right. It's your responsibility. It's your duty to do so. Okay. We got kids getting out of class now, so we need to wrap her up. But we're going to come back next week. We'll talk more about it. All right? This is good stuff. But I have to stress tonight, if you don't know if you're registered, you got to get registered tonight, okay? And then we can talk about the rest next week, but we're out of time. So let me pray and we'll close. Father God, we thank you for this great nation. Lord, we thank you for our forefathers who prayed to give us direction straight from your word. As I look at the form of government we had, it comes right from your word. Who sought you. And Lord, I just thank you for that. I thank you for those who gave us this country, and I thank you for those who have fought to keep us in the blessings that you have given us. And Lord, I pray that your blessings would continue to be on us. You have blessed this nation, and we know that full well. Lord, I pray that we will bless you in return as we live out the light that you've called us to be. We love you, God, and we thank you for all the goodness that you've shown us. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.